Can everybody see those slides? Okay, over to you, Philip, please.
Thank you, Suzanne. Morning, everyone. What we're going to try and cover today is the ramifications of an event that took place just over 6 years ago. In the insurance industry, in my career, which spans 44 years, there's been a number of what one would call landmark happenings that have focused the insurance industry, moulded what happened, in some instances changed legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, contractual frameworks, and Grenfell is one such incident. I start from the point that I'm in no way, shape or form looking to trivialise or undervalue the impact of the human element of this. I'm well aware that people lost their lives, and I'm well aware that hundreds of people were directly and indirectly affected by this. So my comments are based upon how the regulatory and legal framework changed, and by design, it's not intended to go through the regulations in full detail, but just to highlight some key points, because insurance covers react to, particularly legal liability covers, and professional indemnity is a good example of that, react to liability that might be founded under common law, regulation, statute, contract, warranty, undertaking or agreement. And what we're going to demonstrate, I hope, is a link between what happened, how the industry reacted in terms of regulatory status, what it decided to do, what it's still continuing to decide to do, and how insurers reacted to that, and to be fair, continue to react to that. So if you see on that first slide, those are the headline areas that we're going to look at on regulatory issues. Thanks, Suzanne. And then we're going to see how that has crossed over to insurance and insurers, and look at how they have reacted and how that has positioned their customers, our clients, people such as yourself who buy insurance. This is a very important thing, because one of the comments made in the recent past, particularly after the most recent tranche of regulatory updates, one of the comments was this may just end up with all the laudable intent that it has of just creating a problem because people have got a vast number of potential legal liabilities that they simply cannot insure. So some are seeing it as a little bit of a double-edged sword here, but that will become a little clearer as we go through. Thanks very much, Suzanne. Just whilst everybody's profoundly aware of what went on, I'm just setting a little bit of a background scene, and being completely honest, throughout my time, and I've only ever specialised in dealing with the construction sector in insurance broking career, I can't personally remember a set of combined factors that have made matters worse and more difficult for our customers in my lifetime. I've never seen anything like the combination of things that we have encountered, that we've got to face up to. I do, however, believe construction as a sector is a fundamentally robust sector, and it will bounce back. But this is pretty difficult, and our client base are finding it pretty difficult. The Grenfell fire, which was June 2017, had a very marked effect on construction and anybody who trades within it, whether they be a consultant, contractor, a specialist trade contractor, or in our particular narrow field, an insurance broker. What we had to face was a fire which took place in a big tower block in North Kensington. There was a report that was initially set up, an inquiry, and the first report came out in October 2019, the first phase, and it highlighted an awful lot of what it felt were failings. The main one being that there was a distinct failure to comply with building regulations. That was a very overt point that the committee members made at that stage. Thank you, Suzanne. It won't be a surprise to anyone to know that their main concerns regarding the external walls, which they say clearly breached building regulations. The specification and application of the cladding was the main factor. There are going to be an awful lot of things that are still to come out of this, but there is no doubt that the third point that I make down there on that slide is that the entire fire safety characteristics of that building were fundamentally altered by the method of work and the programme of works that were undertaken. The concrete firebox design type building that represented was essentially one that was never designed to be evacuated. That any fire, let's just say an internal fire in a kitchen, the idea would be, the design characteristics were that that fire would be safely contained within a firebox, 2-hour firebox. The fire brigade would come along, would put that fire out, and there'd be no need for anybody else to have any knowledge of it, be any the wiser, or to disrupt their lives. What happened, and the way in which the building was clad on the outside, created a totally different dynamic. And the results of that were seen quite clearly and were quite catastrophic. So you could look at the wider implication of how that remodelling was designed in thinking, was that the fundamental start of the problem? There are others. As I say, the build quality has been very, very heavily criticised. Window seals not being effective, a whole variety of things weren't correctly installed. And there were a number of fire safety issues within the building that were heavily criticised and questioned. Fire escapes, fire doors, a number of these were compromised. This was a whole plethora of things all combined to create what happened on that day. I'm sure many of us, I was on holiday at the time, and I remember watching the news footage on the television, and I said to my wife, that building's got an external cladding system that has just exacerbated this problem. And I fundamentally feel that was a key part of it. The fire brigade were roundly criticised. I feel that's a little harsh because they acted in accordance with what the dynamics of that building said they should do. And they told people to wait inside because that was the best advice at the time. Obviously, they can't train for an event of this nature. You can't mock up and practice on a major fire on a 24-storey building. It's not particularly easy thing to accommodate. And I'm not, again, I stress, I'm not trivialising it, but I think to say you weren't trained, you weren't prepared is perhaps a little bit harsh. The inquiry continues, and on the 6th anniversary, they issued a statement to those most deeply affected by the incident, saying that they were looking to hopefully positively conclude their findings as quickly as possible to give people some kind of closure on the whole thing. And we as an industry, and I'm sure everyone awaits the final outcome and what those findings will be. Thanks, Suzanne. The Building Safety Act is one thing that you can clearly see has spawned from everything that's happened. These are the headlines of what it's done. It's extended a limitation period, which previously operated under the Defective Premises Act 1972. And that's now retrospectively been lengthened from 6 to 30 years. I mentioned a bit earlier about potential liabilities that you can or can't cover under an insurance programme. And now we potentially have a 30-year tail for long-term liability for defects in workmanship in a construction project. It's also introduced a range of new powers so that construction product manufacturers and suppliers, and again, while it doesn't just apply to external cladding, you can see the focus. They want to be able to get to those people who manufacture, supply, accredit the products that are being used within the industry. It also made a change so that those companies that set up an SPV, a particular trading vehicle, to develop a particular site, usually those companies are deregistered, liquidated, insolvent liquidation 3 or 4 years after the event. And in theory, the idea is that all the liabilities that are attached die with that company. This change means that is not the case. And those people who have set up an SPV, particularly to ring fence liability of this nature, will not be able to escape that. That will be something that can be pursued. I think that's an important thing. Thanks, Suzanne. This first line may seem a statement of the blindingly obvious, but they're saying that buildings must be fit for habitation. I don't think we can argue with that statement. Everybody involved in the process of design, construction, delivery is bound by this. I mentioned how I felt the design of the reconfiguration of Grenfell Tower fundamentally compromised fire safety. It changed the characteristics of that building, and in doing so, it changed the way in which a major fire would affect the building and those in the building itself. It offers now wider protection to leaseholders, and it's introduced new powers so that construction product manufacturers and suppliers can be sued. It doesn't just apply to external cladding. And as I said, we have issues here where the SPVs cannot allow people to escape liability. And one thing you cannot do, you cannot contract out of your liability. So a building construction firm has to go along, they cannot contract out. Fire Safety Act, that came in and redefined the duties of what it termed the responsible person in respect of multiple occupancy residential dwellings. Now, whilst it is predictable that a lot of what's gone on has focused on high-rise multiple dwellings, because that's what Grenfell represented. Obviously, that's not the only fire safety and fire risk issue within the construction sector, but it's fairly predictable that it has focused on that area. And the responsible person, which to all intents and purposes is the landlord, the building owner, are responsible for the structure itself. That includes any entrance doors to individual flats, all the external walls, cladding, which includes insulation behind that, and all the fixings and all common parts. So they are the owner, they are the landlord, it's their building, and they're responsible for what I would call the skeleton of the building. One purpose of this act being introduced was to, it said, outline and overcome some ambiguities in the fire safety order 5, which it felt weren't strident enough. That responsible person has got a duty to update all the fire risk assessments on the building. So they've got to go around and say, this is what the building is, and what do we do in the event of a major fire? How do we evacuate? How do we deal with things? The owner of the building is made responsible for that particular duty. Thanks, Suzanne. They were then further refined in Fire Safety England regulations in 2022. They apply to multiple occupancy buildings over 11 metres in height, and that relates to England only. The responsible person must deal with building plans, external wall systems, lifts, key firefighting equipment, and for buildings over 11 metres high, all fire doors. That makes it very clear these are the landlord's responsibility. And insurance of the building is just as important as insurance of property whilst it's being built. This is why it has such a profound effect on and a knock-on effect on the insurance industry. They are still looking at differential requirements for new buildings, but these retrospective requirements relate to current stock. Thanks, Suzanne. Building regulations understandably reflected fairly quickly on what happened. Now, accepting that there was a fundamental breach of the existing building regulations, they decided to try and clarify certain aspects straight away, and the use of external walls of combustible materials was understandably banned straight away. They updated Part B fire safety, amongst a number of other changes straight away. And there are further obligations, duties, and responsibilities which relate directly to what are deemed to be high-risk buildings. And the owners of those buildings are being made responsible. Not the leaseholders, not the occupants, but the owners. Thank you. What's been introduced is a register of high-risk buildings. And all owners of what are defined as high-risk buildings have to register on a central database no later than October 2023. Again, it might seem simplistic, but the definition of what's a high-risk building looks like Grenfell. Residential multiple occupancy, i.e. more than 2 units, over 18 metres or 7 stories. This is where they focused on. I stress again, these are not the only type of properties that represent a fire risk and a safety risk in the construction sector. But this, predictably perhaps, understandably perhaps, has been where they focused. So you can see all the logic that has been tried to be applied in reaction to what happened at Grenfell. But a lot of things in our life happen as a reaction rather than a proactive measure preempting a problem. I understand there could be some 12,500 buildings that will be on such a register, which is a considerable number. Before we go on to insurance issues, were there any particular questions that arose from that whistle-stop tour of changes in regulation? Because all I was trying to show was that everything focused and ramped up that focus on fire and fire safety and the rules and the do's and don'ts. This is hugely important because what we're now going to go to look on is how the insurance market reacts. Now, many of you, if you have a similar vintage to myself, will remember various issues across the UK that have fundamentally changed insurers' attitudes and the way in which insurance is bought. Many will remember the terrorist attacks in the 70s, 80s, 90s, giving rise to insurance companies pulling terrorism cover out of their protective envelope. The government had to step in to set up what at the time was Paul Re. You'll remember changes in employers' liability, limits of indemnity following major fire disasters on an oil rig in particular, where what was previously cover available unlimited became a fixed limit of indemnity. Insurers have frequently reacted to what they call a major event in a particular and prescriptive way. Grenfell's not the only thing that's happened in the recent past that has made the current insurance market particularly challenging. It goes only back a few years, but we had obviously some very major flood events in South Yorkshire and the Midlands. Insurers themselves have to pay for their own reinsurance. They effectively lay off part of their risk to another insurer, and the cost of that has gone up significantly, and the rules and ramifications and implications have changed. So the reinsurers have driven things that insurers are now routinely seeking to impose. This has caused, that's caused a number of problems within the industry. Solvency II directive was essentially an EU directive, and it meant that all the insurance companies trading in the UK had to effectively reserve for any outstanding claims as if they would be paid in full. And that changes their appetite and it changes premium levels. Thanks, Suzanne. The Ogden table is a mechanism whereby a court might determine a scale of payment to an injured party in a personal injury claim to try and take into account long-term care costs, etc. That factor that the courts built into a settlement and a payment increased eightfold. And therefore, if you had a personal injury claim reserved with an insurer for 10,000, it suddenly escalated significantly, 70 or 80,000. A reserved claim drives insurance premiums. So you can see the impact it might have on the insurance market across the piece. Fairly recently, there was a new chairman at Lloyd's, and he came in with the proverbial new broom, and he was pretty draconian in what he did, and he saw that there were many syndicates writing business at Lloyd's that technically they were not authorised to do. They were writing outside of their remit, and many of them were forced to cease writing. Now, this reduces the number of available insurers in the market. There's a pretty simple supply and demand economic measure that goes on here. The fewer the options, the lower the number of potential options, the greater the chance that we end up with a pricing model that we don't particularly like. Just to add the icing and the glacé cherry on the top with the small matter of global pandemic, which has and will cost billions, insured and uninsured. Obviously, it will have an economic knock-on effect for a generation. Again, I'm not trivialising that. I'm just setting out where the insurance market is and the kind of things that have effectively caused this particular problem that we've been seeing most recently. I call it, with a bit of plagiarism from a very, very good film, a perfect storm. It's all combined to give those in the insurance market, those who buy insurance, a particularly difficult time when frankly they don't need it, particularly in construction when costs are escalating at an alarming rate, material costs, manpower, labour costs and shortage. Really, we didn't need a particularly difficult insurance market, but regrettably, that's what we've got. Thanks, Suzanne. Now, cladding, or as we in the insurance industry often refer to it, the C word, which we try not to use. Quite clearly, the insurance market, particularly in the domain of professional indemnity, because they deal with who specified this cladding, who recommended its use, was it, quote, fit for purpose? Now, the Grenfell inquiry has made its own determination on that particular point. And my understanding, having previously delivered a joint seminar with the law firm Silver Shemmings, when we did some research on everything surrounding Grenfell, my understanding is that the value engineering that saw the cladding system changed saved about £250,000. Now, I'm not going to try to equate that to what happened and how you value that against the human impact of what happened, but it was a cost saving. Similarly, they declined to install a sprinkler system. It was a cost saving. There's a direct correlation between cost and safety, in my view. In construction, there always has been. And I think that's an inescapable conclusion. A personal opinion, it's not the opinion of the company, it should not be taken that way, but that's a personal view. Now, as has often happened with insurers, if they see a problem, they put it in reverse and try and get out of it as quickly as they can do. The word itself, cladding, became demonised without any thought realistically about what they were actually underwriting. So understanding the individual risk characteristics largely fell off the radar. Is a stone panel cladding? Yeah, probably is. One of the problems that the insurance industry encountered or caused itself was it went about a intense program of applying endorsements to exclude cladding, although didn't think to actually put a definition in their policy of what cladding actually was, thus rendering themselves and the courts open to a judgment that might say, well, hold on, what exactly do you mean by that? Because if you've not defined it and there's an ambiguity in a policy wording, the courts would find in favour of the claimant, the policyholder, not the insurer, because that ambiguity, that inadequacy is their problem. And that's what they did to start with. They were so hurried to exclude cladding, they didn't think about how that would apply. As I said, the underwriting of an individual risk largely went out the window. Very clumsy, very, very, unfortunately, I speak against the industry that I work in, but it is unfortunately slightly typical. It's a rushed response. I understand what they're trying to do, but it wasn't considered in the way that it arguably should have been, and therefore that in itself then compounded problems that we were already facing. Thank you, Suzanne. As I mentioned, what is cladding? Is it timber? Is it decorative? The dreaded ACM panel, which obviously is the bête noire in this particular situation. As I mentioned, many insurers would deem stone panels, under their language, to be seen as external cladding systems. But the fire safety issues arising out of the use of a stone panel are vastly different to those that might be associated with an ACM panel. The other interesting thing, and I just put this out there, because I was talking to a construction firm post Grenfell, and I said, and they were talking about ACM cladding. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll sit in this room, you go and get 6 panels of exactly the same type that were retro specified at Grenfell. I said, you put them in this room and see whether they catch fire. And the answer is they wouldn't. There have to be outside and other determinant factors that make this type of situation arise. Hence the point I made. There was a whole raft of factors, but cladding became a focus. It became where insurers, in a very narrow and I think slightly unintelligent approach, where they put their attention. And what they decided to do, as we'll see a little bit later, was quite draconian and has a marked effect on the construction sector. One of the things they have done and had done was move, in particular of professional indemnity, move towards some form of total fire safety and or combustibility exclusion. So anything relating to the fire safety characteristics of a building where you would have had a design responsibility, and you can look at something like the JCT design build contract, the 2016 variant being the latest one, and see the complications that would cause for people. And as I said, I'll run through the impact of those kind of reactions and the actions a little bit later. Thanks. Modern methods of construction. Unfortunately, with some of the new sustainable products, the green lobby view, and I'm not diminishing or derogating in any way, their view is almost diametrically opposed to the insurance market view, where timber frame construction is widely seen, widely used, widely implemented. Insurers absolutely hate it with a vengeance. We've seen a number of major fires. There's no doubt you could be involved in effectively in a total loss. They've been very savage. I've seen a number. There was a big fire up in Milton Keynes, and a 6-story building, timber frame construction, became a pile of charcoal in about 50 minutes. You salvage nothing, and insurers are hugely uncomfortable with it. And this drives their attitude, and it, as I mentioned earlier, it drives the attitude of those people that insure them. This knock-on effect. Thanks, Suzanne. Therefore, what we end up facing when we're trying to arrange construction insurance during the build, but also when people are looking to insure the building post-construction, we're definitely seeing insurers' reaction to the use of such materials being much more negative. Cost implications, cover restrictions, these type of things. We've got timber frame, cross laminate, glue lam, and a whole variety of others. And broadly speaking, the insurer's view of these materials is a deeply suspicious one, whereas there are other advantages for using such systems. Off-site fabrication being one, all the green credentials, and I'll categorise them as the green credentials rather than going into it too deeply, but there's a whole string of reasons why use of such materials in a construction project are a good idea, but not for insurers. We as a company place an awful lot of project-specific single project construction insurance, ranging to projects that are £500 million in size, from much smaller projects. And Wherever timber frame construction's involved, where you might ordinarily require one insurer for a £20 million construction project, on a timber frame, you're more likely to need three because they will not subscribe 100% to that particular exposure. That's the kind of, if you like, that gives you a ratio of underwriting consideration on things within the modern methods of construction arena. It will immediately dampen and reduce appetite, immediately make a capacity to get the product insured an issue, and you have to look for a wider panel of insurers to achieve that. Thanks, Suzanne. On annual insurances these days, what we are seeing is that insurers, many of the mainstream composite insurers, names you'll all know, AXA, Aviva, Allianz, Zurich, are imposing a maximum sum insured for any one timber frame construction or range of communicating buildings which have that feature. This imposition again means that you've got considerations of the availability of insurance for a larger timber frame product. We've bumped into that an awful lot. Hopefully many of you will be familiar with the Joint Code of Practice for Fire Prevention on construction sites and buildings undergoing renovation. To give it its full title, we call it JCOP. It's on its 9th edition at the moment, but in the 8th incarnation, that's when they introduced a very specific set of requirements for large timber frame construction, and that's set out and defined. But they certainly, the height of the structure was a major consideration. I never felt that timber frame construction should be used in an 8-story student accommodation block, but it has been. I felt that was an accident waiting to happen, and sure enough, accidents happen. Thanks, Suzanne. Whenever you have a construction project of this type, and particularly what they deem larger projects within the JCOP, insurers will come along and adopt a quite, not intrusive, but they will be quite a robust survey framework, and they will require particular measures to be taken on site. They're very keen to avoid any risks that they possibly can to that frame catching fire before it's encapsulated. There are still risks once it's encapsulated, but obviously there's a particular time where it's exposed to a greatest degree. I'm given to believe, working as we do with a number of health and safety consultants who are customers of ours, that in the event of there being an investigation or a major fire, the health and safety executive would use JCOP as a measure, as what should have been done. Were these steps followed? That's the kind of steps they'll take. It's not as straightforward a link between, say, the CDM regulations and the Health and Safety at Work Act, but JCOP and the UK timber frame guidance, there'll be things that they'll look at. Did you do what was reasonable to do within the industry? However, as I say at the bottom there, the use of these materials isn't going to stop because there are benefits to using them. But the insurance issues, they're going to remain, and we're going to have to navigate our way around them to make sure customers on all levels can get protection during and post-construction on buildings that they choose to use this type of material. Thanks, Suzanne. Professional indemnity. In the seminar that I co-presented back in 2018, I made some predictions what would happen with the insurance market and professional indemnity in particular. I got it wrong. I understated it. I thought there were certain things that would happen, but sadly, it turned out to be far worse than I imagined. And the impact has been very, very profoundly felt across the industry. I mentioned a bit earlier, there's been the imposition of fire safety exclusions, conditions. There's been insurers, rather than offering cover limits on any one claim basis, so you can have 5, 10, 15 repetitive events and your cover was still there. They've imposed aggregations. Much higher excess levels have come in, and it won't surprise anybody to see that the premium levels have shot up. Now, a big problem is that in PI insurance, and I'm sure many of you on this call know this, professional indemnity insurance policy is written on what they call a claims made basis. So at the time the claim is made, whatever cover you've got in that policy year is the one that applies. It doesn't matter what you had in previous years. So you might have had a policy that had no fire safety exclusion for the last 8 years, but in the 9th year, if you get a claim and you've got a blanket fire safety exclusion and it relates to fire stopping works, you have got a problem, because it's that cover that will determine your policy and whether it does, or most likely doesn't, react to that. So whatever your past liabilities were, whatever the back catalogue of risk, the cover that matters is the one that's in vogue now. And that creates a significant problem. Thank you, Suzanne. Now, the JCT building contract. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. What interests me is ordinarily, it's about every 5 years that JCT remodel the contract. There's usually been amendments and updates. So in the 2011, that became the 2016. We're now 2023. I'm not totally sure that the JCT actually know what to do with that contract suite, and particularly the design and build contract. Because very simply put, if you just look from a contractor point of view, there's a design indemnity in clause 217 that makes them liable for any inadequacy in the design. That's the words, which, to use a layman's terms, it was explained to me, means it ain't right. Now, if your professional indemnity policy has a blanket fire safety exclusion, you can see the implications. They can't meet that indemnity. They can't fulfill that obligation. I made a comment earlier in the piece. Are we just creating a situation where uninsured liabilities exist? If a contractor faced a problem of this nature and they knew they weren't insured, I know this will sound bad, but they may well have a temptation to just liquidate the company and say, right, we just got to get out of town because we can't deal with this. So we'll pull the plug. That cannot be good for the industry. As a result of these impositions, and what we tell our clients all the time is, look, you're going to have to go and tell customers we can no longer get cover and have no longer got cover for these features. And that relates to direct contracting parties and any other agreements, warranties, undertakings that they've signed. And if and as and when this same thing, and I believe it has been, applies to consultants, they've got to make similarly their clients aware of the cover considerations and restrictions that they now face. Insurers have done this for their own balance sheet purposes. They're not directly concerned about the exposure it's created. And I'm critical of that because I think the reaction was way too harsh and should have been better measured and should have better considered underwriting fire safety risks in a way that didn't create the kind of maelstrom that we've now got. Thanks, Suzanne. As I mentioned, the JCT suite of contracts hasn't been amended for 7 years. I genuinely do not believe that the design and build contract now is fit for purpose. We act as brokers for the JCT, and I've written to them on numerous occasions, and they say that their committee is looking at it. I couldn't accuse it of being a particularly swift response, and at the moment they're still looking at it. But we're still using and still seeing design and build contracts, and of course a lot of contractors and subcontractors, etc., have got a back catalogue of risk and liability that attaches in relation to works they've carried out under that model. From a consultant point of view, it's important to know how people can or can't get cover. Sorry.
Yeah, Philip, can I just say that the new version of the JCT contracts is out next year. It is going to be the 2024. Yeah.
Right.
It's just about ready now. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Thank you very much. I must admit, I think we can both agree it's maybe a tad overdue. Do you think it addresses, from what you understand, the kind of concerns I've raised?
I've not looked at that particular issue, Philip, but I will certainly raise it at the next council meeting.
Do you mind? I mean, you can see my concern. I'm not trying to be overly critical, but there's no point people signing up to a contract with agreements and undertakings signed under deeds so they last for 12 years if they knowingly cannot fulfil them even the day they sign them. That would seem crazy. It can't be a good way for the industry practice to go forward. The fact that it's imposed these problems on all the back catalogue, that was out of the control of contractors. This suddenly became a problem that they were firmly was dumped in their lap. I'm very, very sympathetic from that point of view. I hope that they do address it. One particular firm I talked to said that this could well see the end of the design and build contract. And a lot of our clients are saying, we will not do a design and build. You want to go back to the traditional, the consultants do the consultant bit, we're the contractor and we build, as in standard form building contract. There's a lot of client advantages in the design and build contract: cost, time, responsibility. So I know why it's popular.
Yeah.
But I don't think it envisaged this kind of thing happening. Sorry, was that Catherine?
It is, yeah. Philip,
thank you very much for that one.
Without prolonging things, could you perhaps just drop through Suzanne an email just with your specific query, and I will either take it to next council or probably, send it in independently before the next council meeting. Yeah,
of course I can, Catherine. I'll do that. It's a fundamental of the environment in which I trade, so I'm very happy to do that. And if your efforts can crystallise something that's positive, then and we can help with that, then of course I will.
Yeah, I'll gladly do that, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a positive. I must admit I wasn't aware of it, but if we're going to have a 2024 version, then hopefully some of these considerations will be alleviated. Hopefully concerns about whether the insurance marries the provisions of the contract and the indemnities will be alleviated. And I very much wait to see what that delivers. Thank you, Catherine, for making that point. Thanks, Suzanne. Many of you might remember the Construction Leadership Council, which is effectively a government-sponsored quango. They criticised the insurance market, effectively blaming them for the inability for vital cladding remediation work to be carried out, simply because people were saying we cannot get the cover that allows us to do this building work adequately protected. Now, you could argue that might be to deflect blame away from the fact there's still 12,500 buildings which have what could be potentially defective cladding on the outside. You can make your own judgment on that. But I know that survey, there was about 1,000 respondents, and virtually all the points that they raised in response to the CLC reflect the issues that we've talked about here today, the restrictions in cover, the cost, the fire safety issues. But I do say we have seen some return to signs of what I call more intellectual, intelligent underwriting and looking at an individual risk. We can now get fire safety cover for future projects for a design and build contractor, for example, but you won't always get the back catalogue cover. But what they're saying is we believe things have tightened up sufficiently since 2017, 2018, 19, and all the changes that we've looked at in the last hour. They're saying they feel more confident that the controls and regimen are in place to prevent this kind of thing happening again. So we will give fire safety cover on contracts that you commence now, but not the ones that you did 8 years ago. And you could still have a long tail liability going back 12 years. Thank you for that, Sam. That's great. Hopefully, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I do get that. But I've just tried to encapsulate in the last 45 minutes or so the way in which this incident, without trivialising it in any way, shape or form, has modelled the regulatory framework, because we can see that a lot of these measures are directly related to what happened and the dynamics of that particular disaster. And then as a result of that, what the insurance market has done. Anyone and everyone associated working within construction will be aware of this. This is not news. And yeah, hopefully that's just a refresher, but it's put maybe a bit more perspective on the way the insurance market have reacted to what's gone on. And yeah, Suzanne, very happy to take any questions, comments, observations, or barracking from the audience as appropriate.
Sorry, my microphone was off. There we go. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I've not got a question. It's just an observation, really. We're removing some asbestos sheeting off a building and replacing it with cladding, insulated cladding. And we was told yesterday by the contractor that BRE have removed their endorsement for the cladding. So now we've got to approach our insurers to see if they'll insure the insurers, which seems a bit strange that we had the meeting yesterday and this has come up today.
Is that Robert?
It is, yeah.
Hello, Robert. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this all the time. I mean, I by no means feel that the landscape is here now and fixed. This is going to evolve. It could be that people are just trying to deflect the problem and pass it down to somebody else. That could be the case. That company may or may not be able to get adequate cover for fire safety. If genuinely the product's not accredited, then clearly you can't use it. And if they're saying that, and it is genuinely the case, then you can't use it. And I don't think any insurer will take a different view. If the product isn't accredited, you can go around whichever insurer you like. They're not going to back you if you install it. Sounds to me like there's a bit more digging around behind the surface needs to take place to find out exactly what the background is. I'm happy to try and help, Robert, if you'd like me to. But I'm not surprised this sort of thing happens because we get these sort of conversations all the time. Buildings where our clients have been asked to reclad the building, but we have to look at whether or not they can get the cover that protects them. So the contractual arrangements have to be very, very closely watched, as do the insurance issues. And the two go hand in hand, as I mentioned earlier. Robert, Suzanne's got my details. If you do want to drop me a little line outlining. I'm not trying to interfere because I don't profess to have solutions to all these things. I've been in a narrow focus part of the insurance industry for 44 years, and that's been more than enough for me, the way it moves and evolves, to try and keep a handle on. Believe me, and Grenfell just creates so many side issues about construction products and all sorts of things. Yeah, Robert, I'll happily try and help. I suspect something else is at play, if I'm honest.
Yeah, thanks for that. What I'll do is I'll wait to see what comes back today from the insurers, but and I'll let you know what comes back from them as well. But this is quite a well-known. I'm not going to name the brand, but quite a well-known brand within the industry. It's quite a shock that they've withdrawn that. But it's not just that brand; it's other brands as well that they've removed the endorsement from.
And the simple truth is, Robert, you cannot install a product that you know is deemed to be unaccredited. I mean, it doesn't put the position any clearer. I mean, to do so, you would be, in my view, potentially criminally negligent. I think that's the problem it places you on. You're going to have to find a solution. Yeah, by all means, if there's something that comes out of further discussions, let me know. I'll be very happy to try and give some advice, guidance without interfering or trying to make it a sales pitch, because that's not my particular bag. But we just try and help people.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Richard's got his hand up. Richard, fire away, please.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. Firstly, Philip, thank you for a great presentation. I think that was a really good summary of where we are at the moment. So thank you. Are we getting to the point where construction teams, developers, estate managers need to have a very early intervention, i.e. call their insurance brokers in at the start of the process now, to make sure that this whole plethora of new things, the building register, if you're going to build that tall, etc., are dealt with correctly from day one?
Thank you, Richard, and appreciate your comments. You're absolutely right, because we get so many issues that we are brought into play when it's happened. It's a fact, it's a problem. We thoroughly endorse the idea of getting everybody to sit down round the table at paper stage to say, what are we going to do? We're working on a large project for what will be a bonded warehouse for Scotch whisky up near Edinburgh, and we've been rolled in. Now, I've obviously trying to arrange a survey visit for my own purposes for this. At the moment, that's not been made available to me. But the client has got all the consultants round the table early, and I'll be critical of insurance consultants because we're often seen as salesmen. You know, we're selling a commodity that nobody wants. It's a grudge purchase, and you get your bill once a year and you moan about it, and then next year it goes up and you moan about it, and that's not a very positive thing. What we should be seen as and portray ourselves as is part of the construction process. Even the latest JCT incarnation, the 2016, when it dealt with the insurance of the works and existing building, which is an employer-related risk, as Catherine will know, under clauses 6.7c, for example, if the building model was such that the employer under contract didn't own it, didn't insure it, therefore couldn't comply with the insurance clauses, that incarnation said you need to speak to an insurance advisor and you need to come up with an alternative Schedule C1. So it recognised the fact that insurance is a fact from the start. But you're absolutely right, Richard. We get involved so often, so late, and by then it's a problem. And it's a much bigger problem, and it's much more difficult to reverse out of. If you consider there's one client we're dealing with who's literally, we haven't started building, but he's had our building insurance team, our property team, with him as well, saying, what kind of features can I build into this building that will make the end product insurance, when we finished it, easier to achieve, better to achieve? That's a hugely intelligent process. So I endorse thoroughly what you're saying, Richard. Earlier the better.
Great, thanks, Philip.
Anyone else have any questions for Philip before we finish? Okay, I think we're about done then. Thank you, Phil. That was a very serious and sobering topic, but very interesting. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Insurance doesn't unfortunately have a great sex appeal. Normally what we're talking about is gloom and doom, regrettably, but it's a necessary evil.
Indeed,
and
yes.
we have to consider it, and it's something we have to take on peace. Did you want to hang on for 5 minutes after, Suzanne and Richard, quickly, or just want to get on with the day?
Yeah, we can have a quick chat. If I just finish off here, thank you, Catherine, also for your input. That was really interesting to learn there about JCT in 2024, and we'll look forward to talking to you and progressing one of these regarding that at some point in the future. If anyone needs CPD certificates, just email me or pop a quick message in the chat. Phil, are you happy for your slides to go out if people require a copy? So we can do that for you too.
The marketing, legal and compliance framework, the idea, I took 2 the pen. They went through a process that took 8 days to get through our regular people. So they're very, very happy for those to be distributed externally. That's not a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next one of these events, First Thursday Club, is on, I believe, the 3rd of August, should be the first Thursday in that month. And we will be looking at the role of green infrastructure in cooling cities, which all sounds very interesting. So information on that will be coming around shortly, or just drop me an email if you want to attend that. So yeah, thank you, Phil. Fantastic. And we'll see you all again shortly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm getting some nice messages there in the chat.
It's very,
Good.
very kind. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's it tries to set out and deal with an overarching issue that is very complicated, very complex, and actually it's one that there's no cure-all for. All we can do is try and help and inform and work with people. I think your point, Richard, about getting involved as early as possible to try and head a problem off before it starts, I think it's exceptionally erudite and relevant. We have to be much more effective if we're involved earlier. It's no good coming in when the problem's already fixed.